All right, we just left behind our discussion of the political dimension of Jim Crow and just a little recap of what that dimension or that aspect of the civil rights movement tried to do, successfully, of course, was to attack the legal foundation, the legal underpinning of Jim Crow. And let's remember, that's based on the law of the land, right? The Supreme Court decision established way back in 1898 of Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that the federal government cannot interfere in state laws that mandate racial segregation so long as conditions are, quote, separate but equal. An emphasis there on equal, because with the Brown versus Board of Education, as we discussed, they're going to attack this notion of separate but equal, and they do it by proving that racial separation or segregation indeed leads to inequality of racial minorities. Okay, so that's the political dimension, and now we move to the religious dimension, which is going to challenge the moral basis of Jim Crow. If the political dimension challenges the legal dimension, here we have the moral dimension. Now, what's crucial here in this aspect is the black church. All right, there were many black churches that were involved here, and it's important to note that there was also many white churches involved in the South, even. Okay, you had Baptist and Presbyterian white churches, which tended to be interracial, and they also tended to be in favor of integration. In fact, there was a popular preacher back then in the 50s and 60s, known nationwide. His name was Billy Graham, and he basically rallied for the civil rights movement. He endorsed what he called Martin Luther King's, quote, social revolution, unquote. Okay, so you can't get the picture that the white church was on the side of Jim Crow completely, though there were some that were against segregation. After all, let's remember the Ku Klux Klan was a Christian organization. They're proclaimed to be, right? Self-proclaimed as a Christian organization. All right, so it's important to remember that. It's very complicated and nuanced. Okay, so you have one of the primary institutions here is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC. And this was established in 1957, and the first president was, in fact, Martin Luther King, Jr. And the SCLC emerged as a crucial organization in the civil rights movement. And as I just mentioned, it's rooted in the black Southern church, and they tended to focus on the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. Now, if you're not familiar with the Exodus book, well, this is the story of Moses and how Moses delivered the Israelite slaves. They were enslaved in Egypt. He led them to the promised land, right? And in other words, it's a story of being emancipated from slavery in the Bible. And needless to say, this message resonated with the black church in the South amid Jim Crow conditions. So Martin Luther King, of course, we all are familiar with him. He was actually, he received a doctorate in theology at a northern university, and very much influenced by one of the prominent theologians during the 1950s. His last name was Niebuhr, and the spelling for that is Niebuhr. Reinhold Niebuhr was his name, and Niebuhr was famous for this notion of Christian realism. This is all, again, as noted on the slide, Northern theology. So what is Christian realism? It's a theological and ethical approach that emphasizes the sinfulness of human nature and what you need to do to overcome the inherent sinfulness of human nature is to pursue justice through political engagement. Okay, so based on what I just discussed, it's clear how Martin Luther King is going to be influenced this. Indeed, he's going to be a leader in pursuing justice through political engagement. Think about this. Many church-going people could just meet every Sunday and not do anything between Monday and Saturday, anything political, that is, right? But here it's saying that, no, the church should be involved outside the actual church and be involved in the street. Okay, so that's a doctrine that's influenced, again, by Niebuhr, called Christian realism. But he's also, he also becomes a student of non-Christian beliefs, specifically Mahatma Gandhi. If you're familiar with him, he led that crusade to deliver India from English colonial rule. And what Mahatma Gandhi advocated and what they did indeed practice in that struggle was nonviolence. And in other words, the English colonial masters perpetrated acts of violence against the protesters, but the Indian protester did not answer with violence in kind. And the purpose was to demonstrate the brutality of colonial rule and therefore influencing public opinion worldwide. And it was very successful. So, needless to say, Martin Luther King was profoundly influenced by this, and he understood that this could be used as a tactic in the fight against Southern Jim Crow. And that's what happens. Martin Luther King convinces the members of his church and the SCLC to practice nonviolence. And by the way, this is called nonviolent direct action. Okay, that's the official strategy. NVDA, nonviolent direct action, meaning that it's not just nonviolence, but it's also you're acting directly, right? You're directly involved, but you are not practicing violence to achieve your goal. So again, this is very important. As I mentioned, church could be just confined to the study of the Bible and meeting every Sunday, but no, that's not what it's involved in. Monday through Saturday, they're going to be involved in this struggle. And that's because of the influence of Niebuhr and Mahatma Gandhi. And notice that, one is Northern theology, one is Eastern, meaning Asian philosophy, and they become directed and practiced in the South. So it's very interesting. And hence you had these nonviolent expressions like boycotting, using their economic power. This is most famously used in the Montgomery bus boycott. And what was done here, well, the African-American community in Montgomery, Alabama, the city in the South, what they did here is, again, use their economic power. They were the main patrons of the bus company in Montgomery on their way to work as nannies and maids and what have you. And what they did is engage in this boycott, and they arranged rides among their community, and they maintained that for over a year. And after a while, the Montgomery bus company relented, and they were successful in achieving their aims that were, of course, related to ending institutional segregation. So it was successful, and that was a preview of what could happen, okay, how powerful nonviolent direct action was. But not only boycotting, but marches, right, civil rights marches. And here you're probably familiar with the scenes of those who were against the activists, right, meaning Southern defenders of Jim Crow. Scenes of them spitting on the protesters, and to remind you, they're well-dressed, they're in their Sunday best, right? They're church-going, they're the middle class again, and in the South, predominantly black, but also white activists, and here are the people on the sidelines who hate the activists, who are defenders of Jim Crow, spitting at them, inflicting violence, even against older people, right? The fire department hosing them down, even women and children, right? And elderly folks. And again, I remind you that the protesters are not reacting with violence. So once you have television, as I mentioned before, capturing these moments and broadcasting that to the rest of the country, and this is what's crucial, it's going to influence American public opinion because it exposes the brutality of the Southern Jim Crow system. Okay, so that's why this is so important, while showing that the black protesters are not violent. Okay, so you can see how the American public opinion is going to be swayed for civil rights and against Jim Crow. Okay, so this is the religious dimension, and then we have campaigns here that are going to be crucial that are led by the SCLC. I have to remind you that it's not just Martin Luther King, of course, many leaders, religious leaders, not to mention the average churchgoer, not to mention white supporters. There's the Birmingham campaign, which again exposed the brutality of Jim Crow enforcement and catalyzed the passage, by the way, of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we'll discuss soon. So it's important to note that here's where you get the famous nonviolent approach as a form of protest that was transformative. It was a transformative political tool in its role in shaping the moral trajectory of the civil rights movement. So you put that in tandem with the political dimension, and you could see how the civil rights movement is going to lead to this change.